Cool. Well, yeah. Hi, everyone. Aside from our little chat fiasco we have going on, my name is Alexis. So I am here to welcome you to our Flywheel Fuel series. I'm a certified trainer here on the Simple Strat team. So that's just a little bit about me. All right, so our Flywheel Fuel series is designed to help you build awareness, generate leads, and ultimately just create the fuel that you need to power your marketing, service, and sales goals. So we do a different topic every single month. So be sure to stay connected with me or Allie, if you say on LinkedIn or just our Simple Strat website so that you don't miss out on future ones. All right, today is a very exciting topic. I'm sure I'm going to see tons of my clients on today's call because I'm reporting it to them. So we are diving into reporting and dashboards and like why that is important, how that strategic reporting can help identify your business opportunities and even drive you to make better data-driven decisions. So this is a common theme that we see with a lot of our HubSpot clients asking those questions. So really excited to see what Allie's going to be talking about. Our general housekeeping. So we tried to enable the chat. I'll see if I can get that figured out here in the next couple of minutes once Allie takes over. But otherwise, you can continue to use the Q&A like we have in all of our sessions. And so we'll have a Q&A segment at the end, and we'll try to answer all of that for you. Our session is always recorded, so you will get a copy of the video and the slides in the next day or two after the webinar. So just hang tight for those. And Allie will point out if any of the things that we're talking about today is limited to certain hubs or paid versions of HubSpot, but you can also ask those questions in the Q&A, and I can let you know as well if that would be available for you. Now, if you're not familiar with this, if you're first time joining in, Simple Strat is a diamond level solutions partner for HubSpot. So we can help you in tons of ways, whether you're looking into HubSpot and you're not sure if it's the right solution for you. Maybe you're interested in an upgrade. Maybe you just need help with strategy and kind of implementing some of the things that we'll be talking about today, or just have a messy portal and you're not sure where to start, how to clean that up. You can check us out at simplestrat.com/consult. All right, well, that is enough for me. I'm going to go dive into figuring out the chat and hand things over to Allie, and she will take us through.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. And yes, we really do hope we get the chat rolling, but if not, we've got that Q&A, so feel free to put your questions there. We're talking today about our dashboards, and I'd like to use the analogy of them being the ultimate business navigator. Now, the thing that we will not do today, and so spoiler alert in case anybody was hoping that we're learning how to build reports, we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of that. There is a whole HubSpot Academy course and certification on reporting. There's a whole HubSpot Academy lesson on dashboards, all of the intricacies of behind how to report, why to report, how you fix things. It's definitely related to how objects are set up in your system, how they're associated to each other, what properties you have there, what data gets integrated. So we'll talk about a lot of the things that we see when it comes to getting the right data in HubSpot. So we will answer any questions. And Alexis is one of our HubSpot specialists that does build reports. And we do have other folks here on the call as well. If they do have questions about those, we can have those answered offline too. But we see a lot of questions that come in, and they're very nitty gritty. So we're going to dig into more of the high level here. So welcome again, welcome everyone. We're going to talk about business intelligence, focusing on the dashboards. So if I had the chat pane, the question I would be asking here is like, does anybody know what this is? But
It's on.
oh, it's fixed.
Yes.
Okay, very good. I love it. Alexis to the rescue. I love it. Okay. So if anybody has flown a jet, which I am not in that camp, being a pilot's on my list. I mean, not this crazy of a pilot, but just like a Navy pilot, they navigate the skies using instruments to gauge direction, altitude, speed, weather, all these things that they're trying to make sense of the environment that they're in to get to where they need to go. So if you haven't yet thought about this, dashboards, they are definitely an at-a-glance performance indicator. They help us keep our eye on the day-to-day operations and long-term strategy. They help you steer clear of obstacles that might be in the way. And then also, they're going to make it possible for us to figure out what we need to do next. And I'm apologize because I'm going to try and move. Now that the chat's enabled, it's like taking my screen over. So I'm going to go ahead and move things around because I'm not seeing what I have to see. But not all dashboards are created equal. So if you're like me and you've driven a car and then you step into this dashboard here that we're seeing that is this jet, it's a little unfamiliar and there's a lot going on there. However, most of us are going to make sense of a dashboard like this. If you've driven a vehicle, we're familiar with this because dashboards are communicated in the same way. Now, as you drive a different car, so like a Tesla is going to look different than a Honda, which may look different than a Hyundai, but the same sort of things are going to be on the screen. We need to know, how fast we're going. We need to know if our engine's overheating. We need to know if our, is our car in drive or first gear or park or reverse. And then ultimately, what are those warning lights that kind of come up along the way? So we're going to compare that to our dashboard here and think about this in the very same way. So if you got into a car and maybe you're like my teenage son where you get into the car and you only pay attention if you're out of gas and everything else, like maybe you don't look at it, which right before this call, that was one of my things. We had to take it to the shop because there was a light that was on. But we want to make sure that we know those downward trends. So we will talk about like the equivalent of what we'll call check engine lights on your dashboard. And the goal of having HubSpot as a central source of truth, we're hearing that a lot from our clients, is I want HubSpot to be my central source of truth. We have to know what that central source of truth is going to display in the first place. So instead of coming to you today and saying, these are the 10 dashboards you need, and this is what you should do, we have to think first strategy, and we have to go back to more of the business use case, which is why we're all here today. So let's dive into the building blocks of good data and good dashboards. So data aside, what I like to say is dashboards tell a story. If anybody's done any sort of sharing or any sort of learning in building a data story, that's how we're going to look at this. So when I think about reading, I love to read. I love books. I love like things coming together so that you have this experience. The story, if you reverse engineer this, is made up of chapters, which is made up of paragraphs, which is made up of words. So if we think about the same way we think about dashboards, our dashboards follow a very similar structure. So we have our dashboards, which are made up of reports, which are made up of metrics, which are governed by inputs. Now, what we often see in a lot of our consulting, if you happen to be an admin in your own company, or maybe you're just like, I don't have an admin, I just make dashboards. We often get asked for a lot of things. So put yourself in a position where you're asked to create a dashboard about X. You do it, and then it's like, is this really driving the insights that we need? And a lot of that comes down to the input and metrics. And unfortunately, without a data story, it's just noise. And this meme that I'm going to show you next is one of my favorites. So this data team supports this many dashboards and nobody has looked at them. I can't tell you how many times that's happened, both from a HubSpot perspective, but also like, back when we were building reports in a previous life for myself, like Google Analytics. Like it's so beautiful and I'm so proud of it, but nobody ever looked at it ever again. Or it was so comprehensive and so overwhelming, and it was like data soup that it became no story, no value. So here our little cartoon we have all the dashboard metrics we want to track. What's trending towards zero? Well, that's the metric of how well we understand all of these metrics. And Tim Fishburne, the smart cartoonist, does a good job of explaining kind of how we feel. And I've been in these situations. I don't know if you have. I've been in these situations where the data itself is pretty, but nobody really is doing anything with it, or it doesn't tell us a whole lot. Or worse yet, we'll talk about this in potholes. There's one little downward trend, and that little downward trend leads to everyone's eye looking at it. And it doesn't really mean a whole lot, but that's what everybody fixates on. So as we take our step back, I want you to think about this. And if you don't have dashboards today, this is a great place to start. If you do have dashboards today, my goal of this time with you today is for you to say, are our dashboards as effective as they should be? And are we all telling the same story? So they should bring us together in a visual way to help tell the story of one, what happened? Two, why did it happen? And three, what actions should we take next? So what I like to do with this is, even if you are inheriting a dashboard, if someone is asking you to create something and you're saying, well, we already have this dashboard, and I want you to take these three questions and have someone say, what happened? Why did it happen? And what action should we take next? Because it might not be that your dashboard's wrong. It might just be that there isn't drill down there, or it was just one of those, like, we made this because we wanted metric soup. We didn't really think about the business use case behind it. So let's talk about a few things in kind of the dashboard setup and some of the metrics or some of the terms behind this in HubSpot. So you do want to provide a very narrow focus on target initiatives. Again, this is taken from the HubSpot Academy lesson on reporting. Again, super, super comprehensive of training there if you wanted to take a deeper look. But again, this is usually why we stay in business, is because it takes too long to learn that. We just could do that for you. You want to be able to compare and contrast different timeframes, categories, and outcomes. This can also be a huge what's the word I'm looking for? This can be a huge miscommunication, is if you have the same different time frames on all of your reports. And all of a sudden, I know, Lexus, you've probably seen this where someone's looking at this in a 30-day window and this report over here is for a quarter, and it looks like we're behind schedule, but actually it's just because the time there is wrong. So you can monitor that using filters and that sort of thing. But again, right here, we have to think about the different ways we want to look at that data. So before we jump into some of those best practices, first, let's define some terms. If you're not using these in your org the right way, let's make sure that we have that. So before we define the terms, I'd love to hear from everyone here. Since we have the chat pane working, put in the chat pane, how many dashboards does your company have in HubSpot? Do you have more than 5 dashboards, or do you have less than 5 dashboards? And I would be shocked if anybody has less than 5 dashboards, but it's usually because they haven't gotten started yet. So definitely more than 5. Somebody, we've maxed out our limit. Oh my God, join the club, right? It goes back to that slide of like, we have so much data, we don't even really know what to do with it. I remember being at a conference back in probably the early 2000s, so they were talking about big data and what problems it would create for us then. And like, current me wishes I could go to previous me and be like, yes, this is a huge problem. And it is. So let's make sure that we have our terms defined. So the first one, as we use the word dashboard, a dashboard is a collection of reports that are customized and designed to display data, but in a very digestible way. So if you're thinking about this again, it's not everything, it's the key things, and they should tell a story. Now, the dashboards are made up of reports. These usually display individual metric performance. Again, this is where people often get caught up because reports are very multifaceted. You can have, object to object reports. You can have, individual KPI reports. Like, you can have a lot of things here, but you're much better off trying to tell the story with multiple reports on a dashboard, which are made up of metrics, which are made up of inputs. Okay. So back again to that slide. If you need to take this to your team and say, how are we thinking about this? This input here, I'm not going to show this slide, but if you go into HubSpot and you go into your data model, which is in the left-hand side of HubSpot in the menu, you can actually see how all your objects are related to each other. That alone is going to determine what you can and can't report on. So if you haven't yet even thought about that, and if you have a giant mess over there, you're going to have a giant mess in your reporting and dashboard. So again, we're not talking about creating reports today. We're talking about the strategy of good dashboards. So before you even touch your dashboard, before you even touch it, think about your decision-making process. So one thing that I know I'm seeing more across all our clients, I think you probably are as well, is we're being asked to quantify and defend our decisions, especially marketers. I know in sales capacities, there's a lot more of like input and output correlation, but especially in marketing, we're being asked to defend or justify our decisions. So this is a graphic from Gartner, and I don't remember the like, I'm sure there's 2021 is the date on this, but on the right hand side you'll see that there's an increase in the amount of people that are being asked to explain or justify their decisions, and I think this will continue to grow. And if there's one thing that's an opportunity and a challenge in the marketplace, it's that, hey, we can measure everything. Okay, we still can't measure everything, but how do we communicate what we can measure and what it means? For example, HubSpot can track where your leads are coming from. But if you're reporting this on a dashboard and it looks like a ton of your leads are coming from direct traffic, and you show this to the executive team, and the executive says, we're spending a bunch of money on this and this and this. Well, they're coming direct to our website. So why are we even doing that? Let's cut that. What if your direct traffic is actually a result of UTMs not being tracked accordingly and you're missing that insight? So again, so much here, because once we put this data in the hands of someone who maybe wants to have financial implications, it can mean a lot of different things for us and our companies. So when you're building your dashboards, the things you want to start with are the questions that you want to answer. So these are just examples. These are not the exact questions. You need to determine what questions you want your dashboard to answer. So for example, how long is it taking for us to acquire a customer? If I said this to one of our HubSpot specialists, the question should be, okay, let's talk through this. And we're going to talk through reverse engineering the answer to a question here in a second. But it's not just, let me just go into report X and do and pull Y, and there we go. Yes, there are some pre-built reports and dashboards that HubSpot would recommend, but usually there's some finagling there. For us, like how many of the people are that are attending our webinars are turning into customers? We love chatting with all of you guys and we love presenting information, but our goal eventually is to, bring in new clients into our business to help them get more out of HubSpot. So, how many of the folks that are on your webinars are turning into customers? Is the new sales team going to hit its targets this month? What are the leading and lag indicators that are going to tell us that? Which channels, we hear this one a lot, which channels should we be investing more and more resources into, and which should we stop? And which customers are going to churn. So again, if you haven't yet created an entire list of questions you need answers to in order to run your business, that's a really good thing to start with. Now, this is an example of how I think through this when it comes to our webinars. And I'm going to talk about why this whole thought process is going to be so important, because let's say that this is your webinar lead gen question, kind of if this, then that. So on the left-hand side, we've got how many registrants are we getting from our webinars? Let's say we're getting X number. The key question being, are they converting to clients? Now, if we just stopped and said, how many registrants are we getting? And that's what our dashboard showed us, great. We're getting, 100 registrants, 300 registrants, whatever. If we just choose to double down on the number of webinar registrants, but they're not converting to clients, we now have actually put the lever in the wrong place. So if we want to put the lever in the right place, we start asking, are they converting to clients? If that's yes, let's double down. If not, this is now the corresponding reverse engineering of questions that we need to ask. So if they're not fitting our ICP, no matter how many more registrations we get, we may not get customers because we need better qualification. Then we go back and say, great, how can we do this on our forms? Or maybe how can we do this in our content to get better for qualification? And then we report on that in the dashboard. So you can start to see how we can ask questions and then you might build dashboards just for you to get insight to make a decision about something in this tree. And I know we're working through some of this personally. So this is actually a really good exercise for me to do as I'm thinking about, talking through this on a webinar. So again, have we nurtured them? This tends to be a really big opportunity that we talk to a lot of clients about. Hey, we did this thing, we did this webinar, and nobody converted. Well, did you nurture them? Well, no. Okay, so the question becomes, if we nurture these folks from our XYZ virtual events, will they turn into clients? That's probably a specific report you want to build that lives in a dashboard, which then you can take back to the leadership in 30 or 60 or 90 days and said, we did this, here's where we were, here's what we're seeing. We'd like to request more resources in this area. So that's how we can actually use that to build some business case. Now, if you happen to be a fan of Mad Libs, which that was like half my childhood was Mad Libs. If you want to do Mad Libs style, a good equation for this might be looking at it as, if we knew insert question here, that would allow us to insert what decision you need to make there. And then to truly understand, again, put the question there, we need to track metrics and review frequency. This is, again, a very simple equation. You could probably use ChatGPT to help you out here a little bit. And then this needs to be shared with insert people and owned by stakeholder. So what I like about this sort of kind of equation is, think about this relative to your current dashboard. Like, do you have this sort of thinking and methodology? Because again, you can attack it like this, or you could attack it like this. Either way, there has to be somewhat of a linear process to define that dashboard, and then a feedback loop in order for that to then continue to iterate and provide value to the business. Now, let's talk about building the dashboard itself. So there's 3 specific steps I want you to think through when you build your dashboard. So the first one is determine the purpose of your dashboard. So these 5 questions will help you determine what this is. So what is it for? How are you going to use it? Is it meant to be something that you pull up in a meeting? Like HubSpot has, you have the opportunity in your HubSpot settings in a dashboard to actually go full view. So if you want to go full view, is it something you're going to put up on a screen in your leadership meeting and actually run through that right inside of HubSpot? I think that's a really good practice to do, but you have to feel confident in your data to get there, right? If it's asynchronous, is it one that's going to be emailed out? Are people able to go in and actually then comment on it and add some details? Like, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Is it going to be shared with your board? If it is there two versions of that dashboard? One is going to be board facing, one's internal facing, but it uses some of the same reports, just different views on that information. So don't think about recreating the wheel. Think about the different ways you might want to slice and dice it. So then everything comes back to that one true source. Who has access? Again, you can make your own dashboards. Like I make a lot of dashboards and in reports for myself that are just private. Like I just kind of want to see the data in my own view. But if I want to share it with teams, again, this is where the setup of HubSpot may come into, because I know I've heard, well, Allie, I want to set this up, but I don't want everyone to see it. Well, are you using a team structure in your the way you've got users set up? No. Okay, this would be one of the reasons why you might want to use Teams. Who has permissions? Who can edit it? And then lastly, how are you going to interpret the data? So when I say interpret the data, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of experience and insight. But one of the things that HubSpot does have now, and we'll show this here at the end, spoiler alert, is they do have some AI insights you can leverage. So definitely take advantage of that. But data that just sits on a dashboard is just data. It needs to have that story like we talked about here. So number two, this is where we see a lot of people get hung up. And again, if you have specific questions, we can dive into this, but determine if you have the data that you can actually track. So ask yourself, do we have the data we need to build this dashboard? More often than not, the answer is sort of. And the reason we say it's sort of is there's a lot of things that can go awry in HubSpot because it's meant to be used in very specific ways based on objects. And then when you start adding in custom properties and data and syncing, you start to get a little bit of a web, and that web can get really messy really fast. So for example, if your lifecycle stages have gone from subscriber, lead, and customer to 50 different life cycle stages, you're going to have a heck of a time to make sense of any of your data because people tend to be multiple like dimensions. And Tyler posted about this on LinkedIn yesterday. We need different ways to actually create that and make that actionable. So we'll answer some questions about that at the end. But do we need to convert data or make any changes? Again, when you pull that initial report and put it into your dashboard and say, this isn't right. Why isn't it right? It might be because we actually need to configure things differently. There might be null properties. Again, we're going to have to dig into that a little bit further. And then you might need calculated fields or equations. Again, all of this, like this slide in and of itself is the reporting slide. Do you have the data and can you actually pull it into where I need to go? There is a reporting worksheet that I'd encourage you to check out in the HubSpot Academy. I just screenshotted kind of the workflow here. So it's an eye chart. Don't worry about reading it, but it does walk you through the same sort of process that I just mapped out that I went through on Lucidchart, which is, can you summarize what you're trying to discover in a concise question? Insert your question. Is the ideal answer to your question something that fits a criteria? This again is a very operational way to think about this. If you are a business leader and your job is not HubSpot 100% of the time, this is something you should be talking with a HubSpot specialist about. You're going to spend a lot of time spinning your wheels, and it just helps to get someone who knows the system to kind of get this out. But we'll include a link to this here in the slides when we send them out after the webinar. Now, the third one's going to be determine the layout to tell the story. So in our layout, we have to think about, okay, first of all, I don't know if anybody has experienced this. This has happened to me where I create a dashboard and I haven't thought about what are all the ways that someone may take this data the wrong way. Okay, that's actually probably one of the first things you want to think about. We build our dashboards, but humans tend to see the things that are alarming to us first. And if they see any sort of a downward trend, that's going to maybe be cause for confusion, regardless of how good the rest of the dashboard looks like. So you want to arrange and organize the elements so that viewers naturally gravitate toward the most important things first, and that helps you anchor the story and where you want them to start. Now, this means you might need to factor in things like size, positioning, and color. I know there are also some issues with like brand color inside of HubSpot if you use certain things. I think it was like if your brand colors include white, you're going to have issues on your reports. So watch out for that. And then be aware of misrepresentation. So again, I mentioned this in the downward trend. The other one that I notice a lot is cumulative graphs. So if you happen to have something you're reporting on and it's cumulative, it looks like it's going up over time, but it's actually just the numbers compounding on each other. So that's one that I know catches a lot of people off. And so your web traffic, for example, may not actually be going up. It's just growing over time and how many you get, but the traffic itself individually is down. So something to watch out for. Now, before we go into the dashboard ideas, just a real quick note here is we do have a webinar coming up in about 2 weeks that will go through the updates that came out in the last month. And we do this every month. Again, Tyler does a great job running through that and then how to put those to work. So I think the last update, there's a couple really big impacts on what's changed in HubSpot, and we're going to talk about how to put them to work for you guys. All right, so dashboard ideas. When you go to the dashboard, or when you think about building dashboards, we have several recommendations for what you might track, but it's always helpful to know where to start. So if you don't have these dashboards or you don't have ones that you feel are helpful, this list of 10 will maybe give you something to take back to your team and think about. So the first one's going to be an executive dashboard. And the executive dashboard is something that, you're using it to govern the entire kind of organization. So it's not everything, but it's the most important thing. So think about this in a car. What's the most important thing that you look at while you're driving? You're probably looking at your overall speed. You're looking at your gas. You're probably looking at, whether or not there's warning lights on. Again, there's very specific things you're looking at from an executive level. Now, if you were looking at, let's say, maybe the performance of the engine relative to coolant, you would look very specifically at that coolant, and that would be how we think about a sales performance dashboard. So taking that a step down, and sales performance, you might be using this for overall like revenue projections. You might be using it for deals, but again, that's going to be sales performance, maybe not individual team performance. Now we get to the sales team dashboard for managers that happen to be managing a very specific group. That's their dashboard. They can kind of get a sense of their environment. Again, here you've got a lot of things to choose from, but it might be individual rep performance summarized into a team and kind of a competitive environment. What you put on those dashboards, happy to share some of those ideas as we move into Q&A, but that's going to be how to think about that. Individual rep or sales activity. Now that we've got the prospecting or the sales workspace, we do have some of those metrics in that sales workspace, but I would still encourage you to think about what is the dashboard that your sales team, maybe both team and individual, could log in and see each day. So if you happen to be a baseball player, you know what your on-base percentage is, you know what your batting average is, even where the pitches are coming over the plate, at least in the MLB, maybe not in like youth sports. But you know all these things because they're all tracked. And so you can start to see trends in your own performance as to what you need to work on. And so that needs to be the case here as well. Now, when it comes to marketing, I've seen a lot of different takes on this, but marketing performance, like HubSpot has a dashboard that it suggests you look at. And again, that's going to include things like web traffic. It's going to include social engagement, but marketing is one of those, like, if the question is, Allie, what should I track in my marketing? The answer is, I don't know. It depends. There are so many marketing metrics that you can get absolutely overwhelmed. So pick out the ones that mean the most from a leading indicator and put those in your dashboard from a marketing performance. And then think about breaking it out by what your individual channels might need to drive, which means things like you might have a dashboard specific for email campaign performance if you do a lot of email, or if that's something where you want to report on nurturing conversions from your email campaigns. When you're talking about customer success, there's probably two ways to look at these dashboards. So I kept them combined, but you might have like how long your wait times are, how many, chat or support tickets you're getting, all of that kind of stuff. But then also an onboarding dashboard of, you have X number of clients and they're at this stage and here's where they are. So again, that's going to vary based on type of company. Your event performance, this is a good example. Webinar performance, if you do a lot of webinars, if you're doing trade shows, if you happen to be doing, sort of like summits, that's a good dashboard. It's not the same as campaign reporting, so we're not going to touch on that here. But if you do report some of that in the campaign area, you may want to also consider a dashboard because that might not be visible by everyone in the organization. And then definitely data health or data sync. So thinking about like unengaged contacts and contacts with the unknown owner and unsubscribes and unenrolled or bounce contacts or something you want to keep your finger on. And then lastly, that CRM user adoption. So we can see things like how many actions have folks created? When's the last time they logged in? With Sales Enterprise, you can now use that user object to report on a lot of that. So these are the 10. If you don't have, more than a couple of these on here, probably something to think about as you could guide the decisions in your company. Now let's talk a little bit about warning lights. So warning lights are going to be the things that come into our purview that may be like those things that pop up on the dashboard that you want to certainly address so that you don't end up on the side of the road without gas or a check engine light. So the first one that we tend to see is too much data and little to no story. And we talked about this at the start of the webinar, but we see so much of this like data, data, data. So if you haven't done this as a result of this webinar, go ahead and go to your dashboard and pull down what you have and maybe give each one of your dashboards a grade. If I was going to grade the effectiveness of this dashboard in guiding our business decisions, would I give it an A? Nothing needs to be adjusted. It's awesome. It directs us. Is it a B? It's kind of okay. C is like, we're just kind of, squeaking by. D, it might actually be not helpful. And F, it's just actually a distraction more than anything else. And it's not helpful at all. So think about that as you're thinking about the potholes, to avoid. Number two is, as I mentioned earlier, like it might be the wrong type of graph, or perhaps it's the wrong type of visualization. Maybe you need a table of activity as opposed to a line graph. So think about like, this is where I feel like my best piece of advice every time for tools is like, start with a whiteboard, figure out if I could graph this, what would I want to see? And then if you're not sure how to do that, take that to someone who maybe knows, but think about the visualization and is this the best way for me to view this data? And am I going to make the right decisions with this information? And then the last one, pothole, is certainly this dirty or incomplete data, or we can't pull the right data. So, for instance, we have a client right now we're working with that has a lot of folks that are coming in their MQL stage. So, all of a sudden, it looks like we're doing great on MQLs, but actually, it's being caused by workflow firing based on imports of event data. Okay, now it's skewing all of our numbers, and now leadership already saw it. And what do we do? How do we take this back? So, you can see how all of that just it's not easy. It is simple, but it's not easy because it all comes back to what do we report, where does it come from, and how do we tell the story around this? The last thing to keep in mind is one of my favorite things as a family. Every Saturday we watch College Game Day, and I love the new segment. If you're a football fan, I love the new segment from Nick Saban. He does this film room where Nick Saban pulls up someone, a team and their game film, and he commentates on it, and he says, "Here's what's happening here," and he kind of just he can take any good football coach, especially an award-winning one like Nick Saban, can take the situation and they can actually tell you what's going on. So this is where it's critical to have the domain expertise and platform understanding to interpret the data. The reason I say this is if you don't really have a good insight or understanding of lead metrics to lad metrics and sales, creating a dashboard to see how things work is one good visibility. Having an expert to help you figure out what that data means is next. And I will say AI is going to help you there, but I guarantee you that I'd much rather pay a Nick Saban to help me understand what's happening on the field if my team is missing opportunities than having just the ability for me to read an article and be like, I think it's this or I think it's this. So please, please, please make sure that if you are struggling to understand your data or you're not even sure if you're looking at it the right way, again, I will tell you that a lot of times I see this in the direct traffic or the traffic sources analogies. I'll dig in even deeper and say, actually, that's not the full story. Here's what's happening here. So keep that in mind as you think about your dashboard. Now, some things we're going to move into for turbo boosts. All right. So that's the only analogy I had when I was thinking about like a car and a dashboard is turbo boosts, which is how do we get more out of HubSpot if you're already using dashboards? So if you've got some of the things set, if you could be the one leading this webinar, awesome. Let's invite you in to do it next time. And I actually think that there's more to have in HubSpot itself. So the first one is provide purpose and direction. You can actually add a description of your dashboard on the dashboard interface itself. So here you see that we've got one here listed for ourselves. It is the overview of HubSpot service delivery line. You could put a full description in. So that's going to be available over on the right-hand side of the dashboard. You just click, pull it down. And again, if you're an admin, a director, a sales director, if you're not, ask your team to add the description so everyone knows the purpose of that dashboard and it's agreed upon so that you get that common understanding. You might even have one like, let's say it's an old dashboard and you don't want someone to be able to go in and actually like they have to know it's old. So one, you can rename it as dashboard old. Don't look at this. Or you can put the description that says last updated X for new information, go to this. Again, keep that navigational information by using this feature. The second one is in your dashboards, it's not just HubSpot specific information. So if you have something that you want to embed in the dashboard, so let's say that it's a YouTube video or it's a Loom video. So it might be like, let's say that you create an entire video on how to interpret that dashboard and you embed that video at the top of the dashboard. That's kind of a foolproof way to make sure that they see that there's some more information that they have to take in before interpreting this data. But because you can add external content, this is just an example of external content. If you have data box that's tracking other things that are not natively available in HubSpot, bring that in, have a display in the dashboard. Same thing with Google Slides. You could put in like the investor update that lives in the investor dashboard. You could put that inside of a dashboard. Google Sheets again. So many opportunities to make this kind of your one source of truth. And I'd like to see, again, if you're using external content, or external embeds, feel free to drop those in the chat if there's any that you find helpful. So we'd love to share those with other people here on the webinar as well. Now, one other place to add context and explanations is, again, back to this slide here. If you look on the left, it says insert images, text, or video. You can insert your explanation on the left-hand side of those graphs. So if you haven't yet added that, one thing we find here as a good helpful tip is, especially when you're reporting on, let's say, MQLs or SQLs, like, does everyone in the company know what an SQL is actually defined as in your company? It may help to embed that description next to the graph so that everyone has an understanding of this is where that data actually maps to in our process. So this is just an example of when you're looking at this particular customer journey analytics, you're knowing, how this gets reported. It's even saying here's where it's powered by, so on and so forth. So if you haven't taken advantage of using those contextual text boxes inside of your dashboards, I'd highly recommend adding those in as you move into 2025. Now, the other opportunity to drill into dashboards is a good one. So this is a example, just it's a GIF that was pulled from the HubSpot knowledge base, so you can kind of see what this looks like. But we can use the ability to drill down in dashboards as a learning tool so that we can not have to put every single thing in the dashboard, and we can say, hey, you can drill in a little bit farther. And that brings me to the other opportunity here, which is also to use the new trends and AI insights. They're currently in beta, but this is an example of the insights that you could see as a result of having the AI summarize that. You do have to have enough data in here, but this is too small on my screen to see it. So I'm going to see if I can read on this one over here. So for us, like, the number of unengaged contacts has increased from 0 to whatever. And then we're going to actually see, like, what does that trend line look like? So if I turned on the trends, this isn't live, so I can't drop it down because this is a PowerPoint slide. But if I clicked on trends, you're going to see that we could do it linearly or logic, according to the algorithm, basically, logically. So I can't say that word, but you could have those two options and it'll actually show you, compared to a baseline, what that looks like. So definitely check into that and train your teams on that as well, because that's a good drill down feature to use. Now, the last power up move that I like to use is this commentating and annotating for insights. So let's say, like, this is an example of a dashboard of ours, and I can click into this specific graph and I can comment. And so notice I put a question here that I could comment, is there a reason why this is so high? And I tag Tyler, comment, and then he get notified about that. This is a great way. Like, you don't want to go comment crazy and really do this all the way across every single one of your dashboards, but it's a way to promote that asynchronous collaboration and some of those insights that you might miss because you're simply passing the data back and forth. You could also comment. So let's say, for example, I wanted to comment and say, hey, no, organic social is really high because we had someone share this that was a influencer. Okay, that's good, because as you go back to your graphs, you do want to find some of that annotation. I love that in Google Analytics, where I could see, like, hey, this is a spike that we had because we went to an event where we paid for it or something. All of that context is going to be important for making sense of your dashboard. So if you haven't used that comment feature, feel free to check that out as well. So that brings us to the end here of the content that we had today, because we wanted to be we're going to keep it high level, but do want to answer any questions about reporting and dashboards specific to the features. If you're having specific challenges with reporting in and of itself, that's probably one of those one-to-one conversations, but happy to answer any questions if we can here at the end of the webinar, because I know that there's a lot of reporting is a pretty hot topic, and dashboards do need to be important, or do need to be effective. And I'm going into 2025 for sure. So Alexis, I'll hand it back to you.